Finding the right story to tell and the right way to tell it is 90% of your job. Here are the types of stories that work really well for web stories. Today, I'll help you get a sense of the different types of stories that can be told as a web story. This list is not going to be comprehensive, as let's be real, it's not like we have years of data on this, but it should at least serve you as a starting point. You could look at the types of web stories in 3 fundamental dimensions, and that is by perspective, by function, and by content. These all mix and match, and I'll mention some examples later on. But let's start with the perspective. Web stories feel vastly different depending on whether the author, most likely you, plays an active role in the story, or whether the subject is the sole focus. Whenever you play an active role, we call that the first-person narrative, and if you don't, then it's a third-person narrative. Consider a story titled What to Do in 48 Hours in Paris. Without you in the story, you'll talk about the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Champs-Élysées in a way that focuses solely on the current attractions. The Eiffel Tower is a must-visit when you make it to Paris the first time. Now that certainly works, but it's not personal, doesn't have humans in it, and is not very relatable for that reason. Now consider a very similar story with the same educational value, but instead of calling it What to Do in 48 Hours in Paris, we subtly change it to How I Spent 48 Hours in Paris. And for bonus points, you could give it an additional hook, like How I Spent 48 Hours in Paris without breaking the bank. See what I did there? I made the story about you. The reader gets to connect and relate to how you spent your time in Paris, which makes them emotionally invested. This technique is in heavy use on social media. I encourage you to play around with bringing in your personality, and I'll soon follow up with a deep dive on a variety of first-person story patterns. Another dimension in which to break down a story is its function, meaning the specific functional type of story. In addition to the default regular web story, there are evergreen or updating stories, live stories, and quizzes and polls. Evergreen stories are stories that don't end. For instance, you could make a daily life of me type of story where you append what happened that day to the beginning of the story every day. You could link or embed that story from your website so that readers can always come back to your story journal. Live stories go one step further. In this case, you append new story pages in real time. Yes, even while the reader has the story open on their phone. This can be a really cool choice for things like live events or breaking news coverage, and web stories support this natively. Unfortunately, as of today, I'm not aware of any visual editors that support live stories, so you will either have to code this functionality from scratch or ask your friendly tool builders to put that feature on the roadmap. Quizzes and polls can either refer to an entire story that is a quiz or a single page slotted into a larger story. In any case, web stories have just started to support this really cool interactive way to engage with your audience. The built-in feature allows you to ask a question like cats or dogs, and then have the user tap on one of multiple choices, after which you can reveal an insight or branch to another story page. Like always, check with your creation tool whether they expose this functionality already. So far, we've been talking about 2 dimensions that inform the delivery style and type, but I've saved the biggest consideration for last, the type of content. If you prefer stories that have an end and a beginning, then experiential and educational stories are for you. If not, then a listicle is a tried and true choice. Experiential stories are meant to have the user experience a place, event, or simply a moment in time. They're often meant to inspire, lead to reflection, or instill emotions. They can have tremendous impact. Examples in that category are types like investigative journalism, for instance reporting on a town with more dogs than people.
Welcome! Hi, my name is Leah Battle, and you're at Territorial or Land of the Strays.
Or a photo essay about a place or event, which is usually made of high-quality portraits and compelling photos with very little text and animations. In 2019, the Washington Post won a Pulitzer with such a web story. Then there's event coverage and recaps, something like spending a week at Comic-Con San Diego, as well as travel reports like the Paris first-person story I mentioned earlier, How to Spend 48 Hours in Paris Without Breaking the Bank. But sometimes you go on a mission to teach somebody something, in which case it's less about the experience and more about education. These stories are often a means to an end. In this category, we'll find things like product reviews, guides, how-tos, which work really well for recipes, DIY stories, and stories that answer a concrete question like, how do volcanoes erupt? An interesting crossover that is both experiential and educational is a historical story like, let's say, Stonewall at 50, Stories of Resistance and Resilience. They let a reader relive an important moment in time, which translates to important education.
The greatest thing that I see that's affecting the LGBT community as a senior is loneliness.
Finally, let's talk about listicles. You know those best of lists, product recommendations with inline calls to actions and so on. Like I said earlier, these are usually just a grab bag of stuff and have no end or beginning, and that means from a narrative perspective, they're definitely less powerful. But that doesn't mean they're useless. For many types of content, listicles are the right delivery format. The most generic listicle is an unordered story of items like 5 things you didn't know about Beyoncé. Beyond that, there are best of or worst of lists. And the big difference is that they're ordered. There's a best or worst item and you either count up or down. They're often meant to entertain as it's easy to build up suspense this way. Another lucrative listicle can be a shoppable list. These are perfect for affiliate links and product placement, giving the reader an overview of a category of products with the ability to tap and make a purchase. And there you have it. I hope this gives you a mental editorial map and much inspiration on where to start. You can find links to sample stories in most categories I mentioned in the description. And in the upcoming months, I'll be doing a deep dive on a few very promising editorial patterns. Stay tuned. Onwards.